good afternoon, depending on wherever you are based in the world. And thank you very much for your time, for joining us for today's webinar, which is on assessing the quality of evaluation deliverables. Although there are many, but we would rather focus on the Inception report. I see some questions are coming on Inception report already from Francesca, and then the final evaluation report. So when is it really that they can be considered of quality? We will try to get as far as possible with the principles, the criteria, and the philosophy behind it. So just a word of caution that this webinar is being recorded. We're doing this so that other people who could not join us today because of other competing priorities, they could listen to it later on. We would be sharing it via direct link, as well as it will be published on the web platforms to be used by the staff of the EU institutions. In this case, your name could be identified or your voice could be identified, as you will speak in the questions and answers session later on, if you do. This webinar is part of a series. We have done several other webinars in the previous years. As you can see, this is ESS web number 9, which is yellow highlighted. If you want to look at the previous webinars, the recordings are available at our YouTube channel, ESS Webinar YouTube channel. We'll also share with you the web link in the later slides, so you can follow them and subscribe to the channel as well. For the next webinar dates and registration, please follow the INPA Academy, and you can register for them there. And then just finally, before we start the webinar, the COVID-19 situation has impacted all of us in some ways, and it has also impacted us the way we do our work, specifically speaking about evaluations. For a long time, we didn't have much access to our respondents to the evaluations. So we used different kinds of methods and tools to get data from the field. So considering these challenges, the global evaluation community, the international evaluation offices around the world, they started adapting different tools and methods and created quite a lot of resources. So here at the EC INPA ESS, we gathered those resources and we published them on Capacity for Dev under an initiative called Evaluation in Crisis, aka Eval Crisis. We also gathered some thought leaders in the evaluation field, and we discussed with them some of the challenges in a voice format, in a podcast format. So there are about 22 podcasts that are also available. And then we also invited some of those evaluators to write some blog posts for us. So please have a look on our website. And very recently, day before yesterday, we published the podcast with the concluding podcast with Mr. Felix Fernandez Shaw, Director of Sustainable Development Policy and Coordination at EC Directorate of INPA. So that's very relevant and very interesting podcast. So yeah, have a listen if you could. The content of the webinar, so we've divided the webinar into 4 parts, starting with a brief introduction of the evaluation quality assurance. And then we will discuss about who are the people that are involved in the process. And then we'll discuss 2 of the deliverables, which are Inception report, so which actually sets the foundation of an evaluation, and the final evaluation report. We'll also discuss the criteria that you can look into, and then the quality assurance grid, the QAG, the format and how to do it on eval. And then, of course, assessment, and then questions and answers. So speaking about questions and answers, please do not wait until the end of the webinar. As soon as you get a question, please write it down in the chat box. So I'm very sure by now everybody's aware of where the chat box is. But then if not, I think in the bottom middle of the screen, you will either have the chat function there, or you may have to click on the three dots to get to the chat box. So feel free to write as we go. Although we'll talk about two key evaluation deliverables, we'll emphasize on three key principles throughout the presentation, like usefulness of the evaluation results and quality assurance throughout the process, and making sure that the roles that and responsibility are well understood and they address the needs and aspirations of all the stakeholders. Usefulness, as you can see from the quote on the left side, that utility of an evaluation should be considered throughout the evaluation process, from the very design to the end product to the dissemination and use of the evaluation. And this is a quote by one of the great thinkers in evaluation field, Michael Quinn Patton, in his book Utilization Focused Evaluation. So it's a well recommended book if you get time and if you're interested. I mean, feel free to read it. I mean, I think there are online copies available in the web as well. Key principle is not to wait till the end when things actually go wrong, but rather gradually build the quality, establish some checkpoints throughout the process, so that if there are any confusions, if there are any misperceptions, those could be dealt with as we go, rather than waiting for the final report to arrive, or rather than waiting for to address it in a quag or in the comments and etc. So stakeholders are important, and make sure you build on a stakeholders map. Some of the stakeholders are also the key users of your evaluation. So make sure that there is great emphasis on stakeholder mapping, understanding their needs and aspirations as we go. The key point is remember that we can't satisfy the needs and aspirations or evaluation questions of all the stakeholders. But then if we understand it in advance with the evaluation team, that is helpful in the process. That will focus the evaluation. That would also mean that the stakeholders are aware of what we are doing. And then also there are no issues in the end in that regard. Okay, so who are the key players involved in the quality assurance? Okay, starting from the contractor side, the team leader of any evaluation course has the overall responsibility for the quality assurance. And as per the SIEA framework contract, they are liable to provide quality assurance for the deliverables. So they may also have a dedicated quality assessor who would be commenting on and assuring quality on all the deliverables that are submitted to an eval or to the evaluation manager. And then there is this evaluation reference group. So all the deliverables that are submitted and most of the time pass through the full evaluation group. And then, of course, the evaluation manager, who is the key player here, who is the person actually managing the whole process. So I also have the evaluation support service in the call out, or it could be, this is for EC INPA. Of course, it would be, other similar services for DG NEAR and FPI. So I would focus this presentation today mainly on the evaluation manager, because I see that you guys will be playing that role rather. So the evaluation manager, as I said in the previous slide, is a person responsible for ensuring the overall quality of the evaluation. And they do it by establishing quality checkpoints at different phases in the process, mobilizing the reference group so that they can obtain feedback on the quality, and then defining rules and criteria that deal with the quality aspects throughout the process. So an important point here to note, I mean, I'll be reiterating it quite a lot throughout the presentation, is to start early. I mean, rather than waiting till the very end. And that is the time actually when it gets too late. You can't, for example, change the methodology when the final evaluation report is concluded. So make sure you, define clear terms of reference, that you are with precise objectives, scope questions, methodology and approach, and deliverables, and what does the deliverable constitute, like for example, how many pages do you require, what is the structure of the report, as Francesca was asking in her question earlier, and check throughout the process if the evaluation develops coherently with the needs. For example, yes, we set the standard in the beginning, but then we need to make sure that things are happening as we want to. And sometimes the context, for example, the COVID-19 context has changed. Like sometimes we had to adapt due to the context, but that's something we have to keep in mind. So, of course, if the foundations are weak, the whole process and resulting outputs will be too. Okay, so now we are at the inception report, assessing the quality of the inception report. So we have this 8 criteria that is set in the next upcoming version of the evaluation TOR. I think it should be with you in a few weeks' time. So that is, I mean, again, great help to have something in writing. We'll very quickly go through these so that you have in mind. And of course, Francesca, you can use them in the evaluation you're managing. I mean, of course, starting with structure and quality, of course, I mean, have a look if the document is readable, if there is a logical use of chapter. And I mean, one key thing is that there is clarity amongst the evaluation team on what your scope of evaluation is, what the evaluation questions were. You'll have the time to discuss this with the contractors before the inception report is submitted. But again, I mean, the report has a value. An inception report, as I said earlier, I mean, really builds the foundation of a good evaluation. But then saying that, I mean, we don't want a very long report. I mean, I think a 20-page report is more than enough. But then some annexes to go with it, like, for example, the reconstructed intervention logic, the team composition, and etc. And then talking about the reconstructed intervention logic, I personally think this is very, excuse me, this is very important because, I mean, the development interventions are designed for 5 years, 10 to 15 years. But what we have seen from this pandemic is that the context doesn't remain the same. So things change as we implement an intervention. So the intervention logic that we design at the very start of an intervention, or actually way before the intervention actually started, may not remain the same. And you may think like, there are some causal assumptions that didn't work, some environmental assumptions didn't work. For example, there could be flood and earthquakes, like some natural disasters or man-made disasters, or the context may change, just like it happened due to the pandemic, and we didn't have access to the beneficiaries, which also affect on the hierarchy of results. And that may mean that the intervention logic may need to be changed. So I think it's a good opportunity when a team of evaluators come and sit with you to ask them to relook at the logic of the intervention, the hierarchy of results, and the assumptions underlying those results, whether they worked or not. So you can have like a more actual and more real log frame or intervention logic that could be then tested throughout the evaluation. So if those assumptions hold true and you have an intervention logic that is based on the reality, that could be something that could be used for future designs of the project or to be shared with other delegations who aspire to implement or design a similar intervention. Stakeholder map, again, you can look for a map and ask for a map of the stakeholders. Stakeholders, as I mentioned earlier, play a very key role in an intervention, and an evaluation directly impact on them, and similarly they directly impact on any kind of evaluations, and vice versa, of course. So make sure that this map is created along with the team of evaluation, so not only us but the evaluation team also understand who is the key player where. And this also mean that sometimes there are some confusions, sometimes there are some issues, so they could be dealt with in advance, specifically when you are dealing with sensitive matters or you're dealing with the national governments. I mean, I'll be quick from here. Methodology. Methodology is a very important part of the Inception report, of course. I mean, you'll have the opportunity to work with the evaluation team on the evaluation questions, refining them, cutting them down, or prioritizing them as per the evaluation criteria that you set, and the cross-cutting issues that you may have, and then the sub questions or judgment criteria that you will develop. And based on that, have a look at how the data is being gathered, or how are they proposing to gather the data. One of the way is that they develop an evaluation matrix, which we have highlighted quite a lot in different versions of the TOR, and especially in the next upcoming version. So the evaluation matrix is a matrix. It's a table which has the evaluation questions on one side, and then it's judgment criteria. And then based on that, for each of the evaluation questions, how are the evaluation team aspiring to answer those questions, what methods they would use. For example, would they use a survey, would they do a focus group discussion in the community, or would they do key informant interviews with the government partners, or with our implementing partners, etc. Saying that, also important to make sure that the risks and limitations of the evaluation methodology is considered well in advance, and then including what mitigation measures they would take if there is any limitation. As we were just discussing earlier, due to the pandemic, in many of our working contexts, we could not have direct access to the participants of the evaluation. So in that regard, that's a limitation. So how would you deal with this issue? So the evaluator will propose some kind of methods. For example, they would say they would use mixed methods to increase triangulation of data through different sources. So that could be one of the mitigation measures. And inclusion and ethics, this includes, but is not limited to, do no harm, not doing any harm to the affected population, conflict of interest, having informed consent, making them aware of why the data is being collected and how the data will be shared, and if they want to access the data, how they can. And then, of course, understanding of the local regulation. In some countries, it's not allowed to use mobile for data collection in the field. For example, I can say the name in Pakistan. I mean, and there have been so many problems with the data gatherers, I mean, with them and the police during the process. So, I mean, these kind of things you don't want to happen in your evaluation. In some countries, there are very strict rules on data being exported outside the country, or having the ethical approval for data collection, etc. So these are things that should be discussed at the inception stage and should reflect in the evaluation report. And then the work plan, you definitely want a clear work plan in the inception report. And Specifically speaking about methods and tools, we understand that not all of you are the expert in the evaluation methodology side of the things. So we have these three services for INPA, NEAR, and FPI, and I'm very sure you would be aware of it, but then if not, you can make a note of it. And this is so that you can make sure that the tools and the methods that are being proposed for your evaluation are both reliable and they are valid. So we are not just trialing and testing tools and methods in an evaluation, but they are rather valid and tested tools and methods. Okay, so now we are towards the final evaluation, the criteria and the quality assessment grid. So I've taken a screenshot from the eval module. As you can see, there are information buttons. You can hover on them to see the guidelines. So as you can see on the right hand side, you can click on the information button and you see what they are. But what they do is, they have 6 criteria, amongst which like one of them is optional. So that's why we said 5 plus 1. So there are, as I said, there are like help and guidance provided in eval throughout to all the criterion and how to fill them. And the way we score is based on 4 categories: very satisfactory, satisfactory, unsatisfactory, and very unsatisfactory. And this is like scores 1 to 4, and 4 being very satisfactory and 1 being very unsatisfactory. So what you do is you score on all of the criteria, and then in the end there is the final score as well. But then eval is very smart to tell you if your final score is consistent with the mathematic average of all the criteria, the scores you provided to all the criteria. So QUAG is just not only a template or a framework to score, but it is rather an opportunity for you to talk to evaluators, to get into a conversation with them on the quality of the report, the validity of findings, and the usefulness of recommendations, and etc. So I will in the next slide, I will show you, if you're not already aware, how the process goes. But let us look at the criteria from the QUAG. So, I mean, some of them are already discussed in the inception report. For example, the clarity of report. You want to make sure that the report is a readable report. It is not just a lot of numbers everywhere, a lot of tables, mean, median, mode, standard deviation, like lots of statistical information, but rather a good discussion on what actually happened in the field, what has changed, and what brought that change, what were the underlying reasons behind that. Length, again, you don't want it to be a very, very lengthy report. I mean, at the end of the day, it has to be digestible. It's a good report should not be more than 40 pages, and 40 pages is already quite a long report. But then there can be annexes to the report for people who are like specifically interested, like a detailed methodology could be, put in an annex for some evaluation geeks there. Simple, easy to understand languages, but key messages should be highlighted throughout. So if somebody is skimming the report, we make sure that they get the key messages from there. So that's an important point. Another point to look at is if the data are actually reliable. So you can look back to the inception report and see the methodology they proposed, and see if they followed what they proposed in the methodology. If the sources are clearly mentioned, who did they get the data from, primary sources, secondary sources, and what happened with the limitations that were discussed in the inception report. How did they overcome those limitations? and if there were any kind of biases. Bias is a big role in any kind of evaluation. I mean, we're all human beings. All of us are biased. Even the institutions we work for are, to some extent, biased. For example, the grassroots level institutions working in a vulnerable community could be pro-poor. You know, their objectives will be towards the poor and vulnerable population. So there are some kinds of biases that play their role. So see how those are mitigated, if that's clearly outlined, and then the validity of findings. Look, if the findings are based on solid data, if the evaluators are addressing the evaluation criteria, whether you aim to address all of the OECD DAC 6 criteria plus one EU criteria, and then the causes and effect links are clearly established. And if the evaluators have considered the contextual and external factors in the analysis of the findings. And that takes us to the validity of conclusions. So looking at if the conclusions are linked to the findings, and again, like they are related to the evaluation questions and evaluation criteria, if they represent all of the stakeholders group, and there is no personal or partisan position there, but a rather collective conclusion of the findings. And then useful of recommendations, of course, I mean, the recommendations needs to be useful. So see, they're concrete and they're achievable, they are realistic, and they're targeted to specific addresses, and also they're clustered and prioritized. Lessons learned, if you have requested for a section on lessons learned, have a look if they have addressed that. So we're running short of time, so I'll be very quick. Here, I have outlined some of the technical points for you to consider, but again, I mean, we have these evaluation support services. We have these technical support available so that you can always share your deliverables with them for their technical input. But then very quickly, I mean, making sure that the tools that we use are pre-tested, methods are valid, and they are reliable, they are feasible on the ground. The limitations and risks are discussed. The data sources are clearly distinguished. They are reliable, they are valid. The sampling strategies are explained in the inception report specifically, and in the final report, if yes. And then biases, we also talked about the ethics in the presentation earlier, and then also evaluation process, the confidentiality of the data, and then also like the anonymization of names and identifiable information, and then triangulation of evidence through different sources. And an important point is to also look for some of the unintended consequences of the intervention, and this is very possible in most of the cases, as it doesn't go as we design, or like changes may happen in different places rather than in a very linear format that we expect. But then, I mean, we don't have control over the context and the intervention. So again, any doubts, you can always consult these technical services. I think, yeah, who do you think is the responsible for completing the quality assessment grid in eval? Okay, let's very quickly do it then. Here is a poll for you to answer. It is anonymized, so feel free to answer whatever you think is right. Okay, so I'm already getting the responses. Perfect. Okay, great. Okay, so all of you think that it is evaluation manager. That is indeed the correct answer. So let us very quickly have a look at the process, what happens in eval. So the contractor sends the final report along with the executive summary to the evaluation manager. What the evaluation manager does, it consult the reference group members, the evaluation. They also send it to the evaluation support service in most of the cases. And that is when they receive the QAG opens for them. So as they comment the draft report, they also fill the QAG template there. And what the evaluation manager then does is he or she consolidates all the comments, put them in a report, and send it back to the contractor along with the QAG. So the initial scoring on the QAG. And what then happens is like the to and fro of the report. If the report goes is approved by both parties and the QAG is agreed, then you move to the next step in the process. But then if there are comments and suggestions, so there are discussions, there are to and fro of sending the evaluation report here and there. Yeah, as I said, when they agree, it moves ahead to the next step, which is responsive services. So this, I know, I mean, this webinar is not for, the IT aspects on how to do on eval, but there are how-to guides available on how to use the eval module. And then also there is a previous webinar, the webinar number 5, that was specifically dedicated to eval. So you see it's yellow highlighted and it's on our YouTube channel. The link is below. And you can, when you go there, you can always subscribe to our channel so you get updates on what we post next. For example, this webinar will be posted there as well. So this brings us to the end of this webinar. So here is this QR code, which you can very quickly scan through your phone. I think you just need to open your camera and take it towards the code and it opens the link, or you can, go directly to the survey link. It's a 1-question survey, should not take you more than a minute. We would really love to hear back from you how we can improve these webinars further. So please let us know. Then we come to the questions and answers. I see the chat box is full. Let's have a look. I haven't. But if you have any questions, please unmute your mic and let us know. It's our chance to discuss. Or alternatively, you can also write your questions down in the chat box and we can address them from there. Is there a time constraint when it comes to evaluations? For instance, we have a small allocation, EDF in a decision that is meant for evaluation, but it's too soon to carry out a midterm evaluation and even more for final evaluation. Any colleague who had recent can perhaps suggest advice. Well, I mean, I think the answer is yes or no. But then I think, for example, for midterm evaluation, it is supposed to be happening in the middle of the implementation process. But then, as we have been mentioning earlier, I mean, context change, things change. I mean, things don't go as planned. In that case, it could be sooner or later. Most of the time, it's later in the process. But then one thing you need to make sure is that it's not very close to the final evaluation, because if you do like in a few months difference, then basically you will not be getting anything different. I mean, what would change in 3 months time or 4 months time, right? So the situation would be similar. So you can think about a different way there. But then, I mean, again, like for final evaluation, there is some time pressure. It has to be, I mean, it is best to be done while the team is there, while I'm talking about intervention evaluations, so that the team perspective could be incorporated within the evaluations, or for example, the implementing partners. So they are there until the intervention is there. After the intervention, it'll be difficult to get hold of everybody. And the next question is, what is LL analysis? I think it was about the lessons learned analysis. So what it is in sometimes in the TORs, we specifically ask for an analysis of lessons learned. And lessons learned are, for example, what could be done differently. And it's like it could be related to the results, or it could be related to the management of the process, or it could be like process oriented or progress oriented. So I mean, if you're asking for it in the TOR, then the lessons learned analysis should be reflected in the final evaluation report, or in the other deliverables as you ask for it. What is the optimal number of evaluation questions? Okay, so that's a good question, Luliana. Thank you very much. I mean, the optimal number of evaluation questions, I mean, my favorite is one or two, but then this doesn't happen in most of the TORs we see, because I mean, there are, as I mentioned, there are different stakeholders, there are different interests. I mean, there are some, some process related things you want to investigate, some progress related things. But then my favorite, personally speaking, is like one or two questions that look into the causes and effects, like the change process, like what has really brought the change in, if not, why not, what could be improved. But then the guidance that you will see in the TOR is that it should be between 6 and 10, and 10 is really the maximum. If you go beyond 10 questions, then really an evaluation team would be ticking the boxes rather than doing a detailed analysis of like one particular aspect that you want to aspect. I mean, the more you increase the questions, the more there are chances that team or the report will be just scratching the surface, rather than an in-depth analysis of something. So the previous webinar, Liliana, the ESS Web 8 was specifically on evaluation questions, and that was done by Marco, our lovely colleague. I mean, he brings so much experience, specifically with the EU institutions. So let me go to the previous slide where you can see the web link. I asked the expert to send a weekly update, just a quick email with a few bullet points. For stakeholders, we need to be careful with the GDPR. The expert suggested to add one criteria on EU visibility. I think, Francesca, that's really good. I think the weekly update, engaging the evaluators, in a discussion through emails, quick email with bullet points, and then if there is something that need to be discussed, you can have a conversation with them. I think it's a very good way of establishing quality checkpoints in the during the process. Indeed, I agree. I mean, GDPR, I mean, there is no compromise on it. We need to agree on this. And certainly you can add any criteria that you may want to. And visibility is indeed a good criteria.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute. No, it's what I wrote. I don't know if colleagues want to speak. So for OPSIS and how to change the timing, I don't know if you have any say in that, but when you prepare the TOR, it's very rigid. So you have to insert, you can only insert, I think, like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and it's a bit complicated. And then when you, that's an indicative timing, but then when you have to go, yeah, it takes a while from our side and from the contractor side to change the timing. So if you could please inform the people working in OPSIS. The other IT aspect, let's say, but it's also, yeah, it's for you as well. Do we have to fill eval and OPSIS both times? Or will OPSIS communicate with the eval? Then yeah, the inception report, you shared some ideas on how to structure it. And yeah, and I told the experts to see the structure of the final report as well. yeah, indeed, the work plan, having a look at the following phases. Yeah, for stakeholders map, I think, yeah, I had this discussion with the experts yesterday. I had a kickoff yesterday, and they wanted to have the WhatsApp data for even people that attended training. So that's a bit too much, we think. So I will ask the project team to contact the trainees and inform them that there's an evaluation ongoing, and if they are available. I mean, one thing is authorities or more formal stakeholders, but yeah, I understand yes as experts, because that way they can send a survey more easily and they can get in touch. But yeah, maybe this is something that we need to take into account, GDPR, when we do trainings, and have a disclaimer saying that if they agree to be contacted for ROMs, evaluations, or monitoring purposes. That's maybe something to think of when we implement. Yeah, the weekly update, it's actually something that I used not in an evaluation, but it was in a formulation, and it was quite useful. And in the end, even the consultants agreed that it made their life easier when they had to prepare the reports, because they basically went back to the weekly emails and copy pasted something and added some information here and there. So I found it good. I had a bad experience with one formulation once, when the team leader was not reactive at all, and I think a quick email on Friday good, just to tell you what the experts did and what they're planning to do the following week. And sorry, LL analysis, did you say what it is?
Yeah, lessons learned analysis.
Lessons learned. Okay, okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Uh,
So
no,
yeah.
no, it's okay. I think that's all. And yes, if there are recordings, maybe if you can share the link where the recordings can be found. Is it in the INPA Academy or?
Sure, we'll send you the link, and
Mhm.
thank you very much. I mean, very helpful. I mean, structure of reports are given in the TOR. So, yeah, in your discussions with them, you can ask them to look at the structure, how to frame it. You can also ask them to look at the QUAG, which was the quality assessment
Mhm.
grid that I showed, so that they are also aware on how their deliverables will be assessed, on what criteria they will be assessed. And also for you as well, we have had a quick introduction today, but then at a time of your convenience. I mean, if you look at the QUAG, because as an evaluation manager, you will fill it at least twice, if not more than two times. So it is good to familiarize yourself with it beforehand. And of course, GDPR disclaimers. You are very right, indeed, and that is the way forward. For the IT aspects, I see my colleague Marco has sent a message, so that is a different service that will deal with it. But then, Marco, do you want to jump in? I mean, with all the experience you have on the problem Francesca is facing in relation to um, OPSIS interaction between OPSIS and eval. Would you like to
Yeah,
jump in, sir?
with pleasure. Yeah, indeed, IT-related questions should be are better answered by INPA support service, or the colleagues from the former DAS, basically. And there is a similar service also in NEAR. Regarding the relation between eval and OPSIS, eval is being integrated into OPSIS. For the time being, this is an ongoing process that will last apparently a few other months. So this means a little bit of duplication. So it means that some of the different activities are to be duplicated both in OPSIS and in Eval. We hope very soon the integration, the long integration phase will be over. Not us, it's the DGIT and the IT services in INPA. I know they are working very, very, very strongly on this in order to integrate everything, both the eval and the ROM module into OPSIS. If you have any specific questions, maybe related to your specific evaluation, don't hesitate indeed to send us an email, and we'll try to respond to the best we can. I think you responded to all the other questions. I don't know if there are any further open questions, and we are happy to respond. And in any case, don't hesitate to contact us for the specific aspects of your own evaluations.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I think I went through all the questions in the chat box, but then I mean,
sorry, Hur.
Yep.
Again, I was speaking with the experts yesterday, and they said in addition to the 5 OECD DAC criteria and the EU added value one, they wanted to add one on EU visibility, and they said, I said, maybe you can have a paragraph on the EU added value. They said, no, it's different, because added value is what the project can bring, whereas visibility is if they promoted the EU through the activities. So I don't know if you've seen this before.
Yes, first of all, very reassuring that your evaluation team is very active. And normally it is us proposing to them to add the criteria, but then if they are adding it, I think it's a good point. But then I think the only thing to see here is that that we don't add too many criteria, too many questions that may compromise the quality of the report, the quality of the investigation. I mean, keeping in view like how much time they have on the ground, what resources they have, etc. I mean, I don't know your intervention, but I think there could be different opinion. But I think, I mean, if you agree to it, it's always good to have additional information, and of course, EU visibility is an important criteria. But I'll just very quickly check with my colleague Marco what he thinks as well, so you have a well-rounded opinion of two evaluators.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a criterion that pretty often is added to the terms of reference because of its importance, particularly when the intervention is expected to dialogue with the final beneficiaries, a large number of partners. This type of intervention. So don't hesitate to hand it up. As Ur said, within the limit of the time available to evaluators, and within the limit of the maximum number of evaluation questions that need to be answered. But indeed, it could be a very important criterion. The DAC criteria are just indicative ones.
Okay.
You can develop further criteria depending on the specific need of your analysis. For instance, you want to investigate, I don't know, governance. You may want to investigate management. I mean, there are many other elements that you may want to prioritize in your evaluation.
Great. I think respecting the time, I mean, if there are no further questions, we can always conclude it here. And our address, our email address, how to get a hold of us. So feel free to write down your questions to us, no matter how simple or how complex they are, and we will try our best to get back to you. But then with this, I think it is time to conclude this webinar. And thank you very much once again. It's a pleasure, and thank you very much for lots of questions in the chat and and verbally as well. So thank you. Take care and have a good rest of your day. Bye.